Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Z. I'm a clinical psychologist specializing in transgender care. Welcome to my channel. Today let's talk about inner critic, and most important, let's talk today about ways in your gender transition, if transition is for you, in which inner critic tends to either sabotage your progress or interfere or be very much self-destructive. I'm going to share with you two areas in transition that I have observed inner critic tend to be very instrumental, so that way by knowing why it tends to invest its time, if you will, in those aspects of your transition may be helpful for you to figure out what to do about that inner critic. I know that inner critic is present in all of us. There is that voice inside of our head that tends to be nagging. It tends to be judgmental voice. It tends to be a voice that always sees things as a glass half full. It's a very pessimistic voice. It's a voice that is always telling us that we can't or shouldn't do it. It has a lot of those can'ts and shouldn't type of sentences attached to it. We all have inner critic. We have inner critic in different domains in our lives. We have inner critic when we're about to shift our careers. We have inner critic in relationship to our body images. We have inner critic in relationship to our relationships. So the inner critic is a normal part of being who we are, being a human, right? It's that kind of critical part that sometimes becomes very valuable, but a lot of times it is incredibly destructive. So today I want to talk about when it comes to gender transition, two groups where I have observed inner critic to predominate and why it tends to predominate. So in my experience working with gender diverse people, I have observed that the inner critic, that voice, that nasty nagging voice, tends to fall in the category number one, and that is being incredibly critical about the progress you're making. And that is when the inner critic inside of your head becomes very hyper-focused on you're not moving fast enough, you're not doing things the right way. It also focuses on the past. I should have started earlier. It also focuses on some things that just you were born with. For example, the effects of testosterone during puberty or the effects of estrogen during puberty. So the inner critic tends to latch out to those things. It tends to really focus, hyper-focused all around the progress. And it becomes very detrimental to your transition because it can actually stall you. It can also sabotage you from making progress, and it can pretty much paralyze you from making the next move. So this inner critic really likes to nitpick, like I said before, glass half empty, right? So it's really like to nitpick, especially as a part of the progress in relationship to your transition. Especially during those times when you hit plateau that I talked about in my other videos, where you feel that things are not happening, the inner critic tends to come in even stronger and tends to hit you even harder because it likes to take that opportunity that here's the moment when you don't really have momentum. So I'm going to latch in and I'm going to take advantage of it. When you have an inner critic in relationship to your progress, what you have to remind yourself of is that you are already further away from where you were at way back before you even came out, way back before you even decided to do anything about gender dysphoria. That in of itself is a very big progress. And another thing that you really want to remind yourself of is that not being able to see things doesn't mean that things are not happening. It doesn't mean that the changes are not accumulating. There are going to be shown eventually. I guarantee you that everything that you do in relationship to your transition, especially if you're actively doing things, are going to eventually add up to something. Now, they may not add up to expectations you may have of your progress, but they will definitely add up to something. So when you have this inner critic around the progress, be careful with yourself when you hear that inner voice. That is just an inner dialogue. That is just a chatterbox in the back of your mind. And it's really part of it is an aspect of the mind where it's trying to maintain status quo. Where part of the mind that does not like any changes because changes requires adaptability, and as human beings we don't always like adaptability. Remember, we like to maintain things the way they are. Most of us, if I've not say a majority of us, don't really like when we're experiencing life changes because again we have to adapt to them. So that's going to be first inner critic. The second inner critic that I tend to observe it falls in the category of passability, whatever passability is for you. So it falls in the category of whether you look the way you want to look, and whether you're achieving the looks that you want to have. For a lot of you, it's going to fall again into passability. A lot of you tend to, in my experience, I have observed this, set a very, very high bar in how the changes should manifest externally, and how the changes should also, and how quickly they should manifest, but also exactly how you should look. It's the same thing with expectation when it comes to surgeries. When we set really high bar to the expectation to how the surgical outcomes are going to come out, this inner critic really likes to latch on to those expectations, and it really likes to point out to you inside of your head that you're not there yet, that you will never look the way you want to look, that you will never achieve this external representation, this external image of yourself, the way you envision yourself in the head. So it's really hyper focused on body image, on gender image. It's very hyper focused on the way you look, and a lot of it has to do with how far you have set your bar. The inner critics inside of our head, you have to remember, are like demons. They're our inner demons. They literally are part of ourselves, not a demonic in the sense of people talk about demonic as if you've been possessed, but demonic in the sense of a metaphor, in the sense that they're part of us that likes to latch out and feed off of our negativity or anything that's perceived negative in our life. And it gets fatter and fatter and fatter and fatter as it latches out. It feeds on negativity. And the more negativity and negative thought you give it, the bigger it gets. The bigger it gets, the more it comes and visits you, and the more it actually lashes out more and more, because it has to take up that much space inside of your head. This is why working with negating and shutting down the inner critic is really, really important. This is also why it's important to have realistic expectations about how you're going to look. There's a difference between passability in a sense of external, right? In the sense of wanting to pass whatever there is in your mind in regards to community, in regards to other people. And there's also an internal sense of passability, whatever there is for you, however you see yourself. That is more an authentic sense of passability. But both of those have to be very realistic, because if they're not realistic, it's going to be very, very hard to achieve. You have to work with what you're given. You have to work with where you're at. You have to work at what resources you have accessible to you. For example, I work out because I want to maintain being healthy. I want to maintain to be in a good shape. I also want to lose a few pounds. But when I work out, I don't have an expectations of myself being Heidi Klum. Imagine if I had an expectation of myself being Heidi Klum. It means that the inner critic would latch out on that. And every time I would get on a bike and start working out, I would hear that voice. You will never get there. Look how much more you have to lose. Look how far you have to go. So that expectation of me looking like Heidi Klum, to be honest, given how I'm built, is not realistic. So I have to start with realistic realities. I see this a lot when I work with individuals where they set such a high bar for themselves. And this tends to happen with people who are very perfectionistic. It tends to be with people who tend to be more control oriented. It tends to be with people who like particular aesthetic, where you set the bar that is so high that it's just not realistic. And as a result, you start berating yourself and you start being really unkind and really hard on yourself. And all of that ends up sabotaging your process. It ends up being very self-destructive, because when you don't achieve what's really not meant to be achievable, and that is okay. You need to recognize that some things are not to be achievable, and that is okay. I will never be Heidi Klum, and that is okay, but I can be the best version of me. When you recognize that, the pressure goes off, you're more able to focus on the things you need to do. So you're more able to focus on the progress you need to make. As a result, you're moving more forward versus backward. This is where the inner critics come in. Inner critics come in those two domains, focusing on progress, focusing on passability and how you look. If that is again important to you, passability is not important to everybody, and that is okay. There's a lot of societal pressures on how we're out to look that we further bombard and put into our sense of who we are. So it's really important to realize that you're going to have inner critics. There's no way you're going to fully eliminate those demons, but you have to remember that the more thought process, the more headspace you give to them, the bigger and fatter they get, and therefore the more they're going to be taken away from you, the more energy they're going to take away from you, the more capacity to make progress they're going to take away from you. So the best thing is, again, sit down, appraise your realistic expectations for progress, where you at. If you're just starting out, maybe the progress for you right now should be I'm studying hormones, and the progress for me right now is going to be maintaining my hormonal regimen and observing how I feel on hormones, observing how my body and my mind feels on hormones. Maybe your progress for passability should be right now, if you're just starting out, should be a social transition. Where can I feminize or masculinize myself, or where I can present in a more gender neutral presentation. So set their expectations very realistically, and you will have more success if you set them way high. Having the high bar for yourself is not healthy. It's not helpful. I know a lot of people say that this phrase, I set the high bar really, really high, so that way when I don't really achieve it, I'm still happy because I achieved everything underneath. I don't think that that statement applies when it comes to transition, because it's so mentally and psychologically exhausting. So you don't need to start off with a high bar. I don't recommend it, and I don't think it's a good idea. So comment below, share, what are your inner critics when you're going through transition sound like? Are they talking about progress? Are they focusing on your possibility? Do you think your bar is too high? Do you think your bar is just realistic? For those of you who are watching this, who do have very realistic expectations in terms of transition and in terms of your progress as well, comment below and share how does that help with any inner chatter inside of your head. I'd love to hear your comments. Hopefully this was helpful, and I'll see you guys all next time. Bye.